Number 12. Christopher McGowan and Claire Inglis. In November 2021, a merciless killer battered and strangled 28-year-old single mother Claire Inglis to death at her apartment in the Scottish city of Stirling. The young woman's attacker jammed a baby wipe down her throat, and her body was covered in nearly 80 injuries when she was found, including burn marks from a lighter that had been pressed against her face and ear. Police were soon contacted by a taxi driver named David Addison, who had given a ride to Claire and her boyfriend the night before. Addison told investigators that Claire's boyfriend, 28-year-old Christopher McGowan, was noticeably drunk and that he was verbally abusing Claire in the cab. As the young woman exited the taxi near a friend's flat, McGowan allegedly demanded money for more alcohol and threatened to kill her. At the time, Addison assumed McGowan meant the words in jest, but when he learned about Claire's murder the next day, it no longer seemed that way. McGowan was reportedly known for his temper and degenerate lifestyle. At the time of Claire's death, he was on parole for a previous crime and had dozens of prior convictions. Claire's mother would later testify in court that her daughter and McGowan only dated for 3 months leading up to the murder. She said Claire's family and friends did everything in their power to keep the young woman away from McGowan after seeing what a waste of skin he was. They suspected him of preying on Claire because she was vulnerable and had a beautiful flat. When questioned by police, McGowan initially maintained his innocence. After being charged with murder and taken to trial, he admitted to killing Claire but argued that he had acted in self-defense. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy McGowan's pitiful sob story. After deliberating for just 2 hours, they found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years. In a statement, the judge clarified that a minimum term does not dictate when an offender will be released, but that it simply marks the time when they can apply for parole. And while he admittedly could not predict the future decisions of the parole board, he also mentioned that it's common for serious offenders to serve significantly longer than the minimum portion of their sentence. One can only hope that McGowan is kept behind bars for as long as humanly possible, given the horrific nature of his crime and his proven track record for disrespecting the law. Number 11. Megan Moss and Samuel Loughlin. After enduring years of alleged mental and physical abuse, Megan Moss made the brave decision to leave her husband of 9 years, Samuel Loughlin, in 2019. She broke the news to Samuel when she got home from work one evening, telling him that she could no longer continue being in a relationship that she felt unhappy in. Loughlin couldn't accept that the marriage was over. He attacked Moss with a machete inside their Vancouver, Washington home, permanently disfiguring her face and leaving her blind in one eye. She's undergone multiple surgeries to repair some of her injuries, which included multiple broken facial bones and 3 partially amputated fingers. Samuel was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge also issued a lifetime order of protection banning him from contacting Megan, who said she'll let their kids decide if they want a relationship with their father when they become adults. In 2021, she publicly shared her story for the first time on TikTok to raise awareness about domestic violence. Her videos quickly went viral, with her growing audience of followers praising her for her strength and resilience. Melissa explained that she coped with the trauma of what had happened by using dark humor for a long time, but by the time she decided to come forward and talk more openly about her experience, she wasn't feeling as sad as she used to. She also said she had gained tremendous self-confidence from standing up to her abuser, but that she feels her ex deserves the punishment he received. Number 10. Andrew and Elizabeth Nikki Wilhoit. In early 2022, 41-year-old breast cancer survivor Elizabeth Nikki Wilhoit discovered that her husband of 12 years, 39-year-old Andrew Wilhoit, had cheated on her while she underwent chemotherapy. During a heated confrontation about the affair at their Lebanon, Indiana home, she allegedly charged at her husband, who later confessed to fatally striking Nikki in the face with a gallon-sized cement flower pot. When Nikki failed to show up for work, her concerned co-workers called the police and told them that she was having marital issues and had recently filed for divorce. During a visit to the home, sheriff's deputies discovered the missing woman's vehicle, phone, and purse at the residence. They also found blood in the master bedroom and bathroom. Andrew told police that he and Nikki had argued about his affair the night before. According to his version of events, Nikki slept on the couch and he hadn't seen her since. He suggested that something drug-related might have happened to his wife and said Nikki had recently withdrawn $3,000 from their joint bank account. Nikki's father confirmed that she had taken $3,000 out of the bank with plans to divorce Andrew, who he suspected of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. During a second interview with investigators, Andrew reportedly confessed to killing Nikki and admitted to throwing her body over a bridge and into a creek, saying he didn't know what to do. He said he was blindsided when Nikki filed for divorce because they had agreed to try making the marriage work. Andrew led police to Nikki's body and was charged with murder. He remains held without bond while awaiting trial, which is scheduled for early 2024. Number 9. Nazrin and Julian Knight. Julian Knight was arriving at his home in Lincolnshire, England after a medical appointment when his estranged wife, 37-year-old Nazrin Knight, demanded to know who he had spent the previous night with. She then charged at Julian and broke his glasses and rammed her vehicle into Julian's Land Rover. Nazrin also attacked Julian's mistress and her former friend Erica Hillier, who arrived at the residence during the assault on Julian. At some point throughout the ordeal, Julian tried leaving the home, but Nazrin allegedly threatened to follow him, tried ripping his phone out of his hand, and struck him in the head. She was arrested for her behavior and ordered to stay away from Julian and Erica. According to prosecutors, Julian met Erica during a difficult time in his marriage to Nazrin, who had already had at least one affair of her own. His health was ailing and Erica was hired as his medical chaperone, which naturally gave them the opportunity to grow close, while allegedly Nazrin embarked on a second affair and turned to alcohol to cope with her problems. 8 days after the first attack at Julian's residence, Nazrin showed up drunk at the property with a bottle of vodka in her hand and ordered Julian to drop the criminal charges he had pressed against her in connection with the previous incident. Armed with a 7-inch knife, she attacked Julian once again, then ran through the house yelling that she was going to kill Hillier, who had taken refuge under a staircase and was able to call the police. Nazrin was arrested again, and in early 2018 she admitted to several of the allegations against her and was sentenced to 15 months in prison for her crimes. She was also banned from contacting Julian for 5 years for any other reason than their children or their divorce. The judge sternly cautioned Nazrin that if she violated the order, she would face a 5-year prison term. Number 8. Robert Glenn Temple and Rosemary Christensen. Australian national Rosemary Christensen was in her early 40s when she moved to Florida in 1996. Her first marriage had ended in divorce, and she looked forward to seeing what the next chapter in her life would bring. She got back into the dating scene and quickly moved in with a man she met online named Robert Glenn Temple. The couple seemed happy at first, but there were signs that the relationship was toxic. In July of 1997, Rosemary received stitches to some facial cuts resulting from a domestic dispute. She declined to cooperate with prosecutors in a criminal case against Robert, and the couple got married 3 weeks later. Rosemary pursued a real estate career and was known among her colleagues for being reliable. When she failed to show up for work in August 1999, they became worried and contacted the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Her car was parked outside her apartment, but Rosemary was nowhere to be found. Inside her home, investigators found torn-up carpet, a freshly painted wall, and blood spatter. They also learned that Rosemary's marriage to Robert was not doing well. Robert was having an affair with a 22-year-old woman named Leslie Stewart, and the pair had suspiciously skipped town to visit relatives in Illinois shortly after Rosemary vanished. Meanwhile, Rosemary had recently consulted a divorce lawyer and was talking to another man in South Carolina. Credit card statements led to the discovery that Robert and Leslie had purchased over $70 worth of cleaning supplies at a Walmart store the day after Rosemary was last seen alive. Robert told police that Rosemary had probably run off with another man, and he seemed strangely unconcerned with her whereabouts or for her well-being. He stopped cooperating with law enforcement, and for the next several years, he and Leslie bounced from one place to another across various states. Answers finally came in 2008 when Leslie contacted the police and admitted that she knew what had happened to Rosemary and where the woman's remains were located. Leslie claimed that she was afraid to come forward at an earlier point in time because Robert threatened to kill her. She told detectives that she had arrived at Robert and Rosemary's condo 9 years earlier to find Rosemary dead in a pool of blood. Robert allegedly told her he had accidentally killed Rosemary during a physical struggle after she came at him with a knife. At his urging, Leslie helped him clean the crime scene, and they buried Rosemary's body in a wooded area. Nearly a decade later, she led police to the burial site. An autopsy found that Rosemary had been stabbed to death. Robert was arrested for her murder in California and was extradited to Florida, where Leslie testified against him in exchange for immunity. The case finally went to trial 3 years later in 2011, and the jury found Robert guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and died behind bars in December 2018. Number 7. John Wonder and Ashley Ahart. 29-year-old mother of two, Ashley Ahart, was just days away from moving out of the home she shared in Kansas City, Missouri, with her estranged husband, 31-year-old John Wonder, when she was strangled and stabbed to death in September 2023. The former couple were in the process of divorcing, but still lived together at the time, and they also worked for the same company. On the morning of Ashley's murder, John dropped their children off at her parents' house in a rush and left without having a conversation. About an hour and a half later, their employer noticed that neither of them had shown up for work and asked the police to conduct a welfare check. By then, Ashley's parents had also grown concerned and were on their way over to the house, where they found their daughter dead and covered in blood in her laundry room with a belt around her neck. According to an affidavit, the name Wonder was scrawled in blood on Ashley's leg, immediately bumping John to the top of the suspect list. A butcher knife and cleaver were found next to the young woman's body, and the laundry room door had been left ajar, but was secured with a bungee cord. The affidavit further states that John sent his sister a text message apologizing for the mess left behind at the house and stating, "It's way easier and much more satisfying than you can imagine." In a series of chilling Facebook messages he sent to a friend, John allegedly wrote that he had no doubt he would be caught that day. He mentioned that he felt no emotion and contemplated how to spend his last remaining hours of freedom as he prepared to flee the state, writing, "Part of me wants to get drunk and watch Shawshank Redemption one last time." John was picked up later that day in Valentine, Nebraska, roughly an 8-hour drive from Kansas City. He was reportedly on his way to Fargo when he was apprehended. The accused wife killer faces a first-degree murder charge along with 1 count of armed criminal action. As of September 2023, he was being held on a $1 million cash bond. Number 6. Cindy and David Rainey. A family vacation took a tragic turn in November 2021 when 52-year-old David Rainey was reported missing by his wife Cindy in Sewanee, Florida. Cindy reportedly told Dixie County deputies that her husband of 21 years had left their vacation home on foot the previous evening to cool off after an argument, leaving behind his phone, glasses, and wallet. His body was found lying face down in a canal behind the vacation rental's backyard later that night. It was immediately clear that David had been stabbed in the chest multiple times. An autopsy found no evidence of water in his lungs, ruling out the possibility that he had drowned. David's death was ruled a homicide, but the case quickly ground to a standstill and remained unsolved for the next 2 years. In late October 2023, Cindy and the couple's 2 sons, Bailey and Jack, were arrested for tampering with evidence. Court records list David Rainey's DNA and blood as the evidence that the trio was accused of tampering with. As of December 2023, all 3 suspects remained behind bars on a $250,000 bond each. Authorities did not reveal whether any of the 3 are suspected of being directly involved in David's murder or if more charges are expected to come. According to the Daytona Beach News-Journal, a wrongful death lawsuit that was filed in July of 2023 claims that Cindy was having an affair with her boss, Jeffrey Sawyer, who was vacationing with the family at the time of David's murder. According to the filing, David discovered the affair just hours before his death and got into a bloody altercation. The lawsuit accuses Cindy, Bailey, Jack, Jeffrey, and another guest of killing David and names Bailey's girlfriend, Eleanor Coker, as the only person who tried to seek help for him before they dumped his body in the canal. Furthermore, the litigation alleges that Cindy Rainey mishandled David's remains by disposing of him in the canal and then having him cremated. In a counterclaim, Jeffrey Sawyer is accusing David Rainey of trying to kill him. His attorney, Patrick Brand, told the News-Journal that Sawyer was the initial victim in the tragic event, which is why his client is counter-suing. Everyone else accused in the lawsuit denied the allegations, and their attorneys declined to comment to the media. According to Sawyer's version of events, David flew into a homicidal rage and attacked Sawyer, who was unarmed, with a knife. The counterclaim states that Sawyer suffered life-threatening injuries which required emergency surgery, but the filing does not contain any claims about who killed David. After the group left a vacation home, a cleaning person discovered a large amount of blood inside the residence and called the local sheriff's office. A responding investigator found what appeared to be an attempt to clean up blood, which is most likely what led to the evidence tampering charges against Cindy, Bailey, and Jack. To anyone on the outside looking in, the case begs more questions than answers, and it seems like a lot of scandalous secrets are about to come pouring out. Only time will tell whether David's killer or killers will be brought to justice. Number 5. Dixie and Scott Shanahan. Scott Shanahan had a recorded history of mentally and physically abusing his wife, Dixie, including 2 convictions for domestic violence that he received during the late 1990s. According to court records, he had tied his wife up, slammed her head against a door, and punched her in the face throughout the marriage, and he was known for being a hothead in general. So it perhaps didn't seem like such a bad thing when the 40-year-old disappeared from the couple's home in Defiance, Iowa in August 2002. Dixie was 2 months pregnant with their 3rd child when Scott allegedly ran off to the city of Atlantic, which was about an hour's drive away. She gave birth 7 months later and began a new relationship with a man she later married named Jeffrey Duty. It seemed like Dixie had fully moved on, but at least one person found it odd that Scott had vanished, and that individual contacted law enforcement with their concerns during the summer of 2003. After failing to locate Scott in Atlantic, Shelby County Sheriff Gene Kavanaugh sent a deputy to Dixie's house. Dixie stood by her story, claiming that Scott had gotten angry at her for becoming pregnant with a baby he didn't want and refusing to end the pregnancy. She told law enforcement that Scott had left when she wasn't home and that he didn't take his vehicle. 3 months later, sheriff's deputies returned to the residence with a search warrant. Someone had noticed that one of the home's bedroom windows had been kept open the entire previous winter, and there were also signs that Dixie had depleted Scott's money, despite claiming that her sister was paying her bills. She had also sold Scott's tractor, telling the buyer that he would never be returning for it. During the search, investigators discovered that one of the bedroom doors had a towel stuffed underneath it and several items blocking it, along with several air fresheners placed near the door. As they entered the room, they noticed the unmistakable smell of death. Under the bed cover, the team found Scott's partially mummified body. It was covered in dead insects and had clearly been there since around the time he disappeared. He had been shot in the head while sleeping, and Dixie had a lot of explaining to do. She admitted to shooting Scott, claiming that she anticipated her next beating as soon as he woke up, and said she simply couldn't take any more abuse. By then, Scott had started beating her 3 or more times per week, and she wanted to protect her baby. Shooting a sleeping person does not constitute self-defense, even if a person anticipates being endangered by that person in the near future. But an overwhelming number of people believed Dixie's story and supported her throughout her trial for Scott's murder, believing she deserved leniency due to the circumstances surrounding her decision to pull the trigger. Community members even pooled together money to post her $150,000 bail so she could stay out of jail while awaiting trial. The jury convicted Dixie of second-degree murder, but made it clear that they did not think she deserved a harsh punishment. Unfortunately, under Iowa law, the crime carries a 50-year sentence with a 35-year minimum to be served behind bars. Dixie received an unexpected break in 2007 when then-Governor Tom Vilsack reduced her mandatory minimum sentence to 10 years. She was granted work release in 2018 and remains in custody with work release privileges as of 2023. Number 4. Helen Showalter and Gregory Showalter Sr. In August 2021, the body of 60-year-old Helen Showalter was found floating in the Des Moines River near Ottumwa, Iowa. She had been strangled to death, and investigators quickly turned their attention to her estranged husband, Gregory Showalter Sr., who the victim was in the middle of divorcing when she was killed. Family members told police that Gregory had arrived home by himself, claiming he and Helen had gotten into a fight and that he left her to walk home. Prosecutors, on the other hand, accused him of luring Helen to a work site and killing her. He then allegedly put Helen's body in his car, drove to the river, and discarded the remains. Gregory was charged with Helen's murder, but was allowed to bail out for just 10% of his $250,000 bond. He was released on an ankle monitor and faithfully attended court until the final day of his trial in September 2023, when the jury was scheduled to announce their verdict. In an apparent last-ditch effort to preserve his freedom, Gregory had cut off his ankle monitor, turned his phone off, and given his car away to a friend before leaving his home on foot. A police canine tracked the fugitive sent to a local motel, but the trail ended there. As law enforcement continued to search for Gregory, the jury announced their verdict in his absence: guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, domestic assault by strangulation, and willful injury resulting in serious injury. A first-degree murder conviction comes with an automatic sentence of life without parole in Iowa, which meant that all the authorities needed to do now was track Gregory down and toss him back in jail. Just 20 hours after he went on the run, the convicted wife killer was captured at his home, where he was found cowering behind a chair. According to court documents, officers announced their presence and informed Gregory that he did not have the right to hide from them. He reportedly refused to obey their repeated commands and was pulled out from behind the chair. Showalter was charged with interference with official acts, but he probably figured it was worth risking the consequences of going on the run, since the punishment is unlikely to change his sentence in any major ways. During the trial, the defense argued that Helen drowned and that a combination of factors contributed to her death, including alcohol, methamphetamine, and heart disease. It's probably safe to assume that the defense lost most, if not all, of their credibility when Gregory bailed on his final court hearing. Number 3. Aaron and Brienne Pennington. 30-year-old Brienne Pennington was found dead in her Gardner, Massachusetts home with a gunshot wound to the head in late October 2023. Her husband, 33-year-old Air Force veteran Aaron Pennington, was nowhere to be found, and the couple's 4 children had been left at home. A neighbor called 911 after the kids showed up at their house in a state of confusion over their father's absence and the tragedy that had occurred inside the residence. Investigators soon discovered that Aaron and Brienne were having serious marital problems at the time of Brienne's murder. The couple had met years earlier at a Mormon singles church group in their home state of California, but were now plagued by long-standing issues and seemed destined for a divorce. Nobody would ever guess by looking at their social media photos that they were unhappy, but a police report from shortly before the tragedy revealed that Brienne was planning to pack up the kids and move to Texas. She was also known to keep a gun nearby for her protection, although the weapon has not been found. And while it's unclear exactly what ripped this seemingly all-American family apart, all signs point toward Aaron having something to do with his wife's death. Surveillance footage showed Aaron leaving the home in his BMW shortly before the 911 call was placed. The car was found abandoned in a wooded area the next day by a hunter, but any sign of Aaron himself remained conspicuously absent from the scene. During a search of his phone, detectives found a chilling note from the night before Brienne's murder, detailing what appeared to be a step-by-step plan to kill his wife. It mentioned staying quiet, followed by, "If she wakes up, just say you're getting nasal spray." The note concluded with, "Get on side of bed, very close proximity to head, put hole in her head." Authorities obtained a warrant for Aaron's arrest for murder, but as of December 2023, he still hasn't been found. He has a history of mental health issues, but with no evidence to believe he's dead, law enforcement appears to be treating the case as if he's on the run. A search for the accused wife killer was suspended in early November, but investigators remain hopeful that a tipster will come forward and provide his location so he can be brought to justice. Pennington is considered armed and dangerous, and members of the public are strongly cautioned not to approach him if they think they see him. Number 2. Anne-Marie and Bill Stout. 50-year-old Bill Stout and his wife Anne-Marie lived in rural Darby, Montana with their 2 teenage sons. Upon returning home from a day-long shopping trip one day in 2007, Anne and one of the couple's sons discovered Bill dead in his bedroom. He was killed with his own gun, which he had reported stolen 10 days earlier. While searching the house, investigators found a firearm in his motorcycle saddlebag. Bill's hands were clean of gunshot residue, ruling out the possibility of a self-inflicted wound. There was also a rubber glove at the scene, which turned up traces of Anne-Marie's DNA, as well as a suspicious note in Anne-Marie's handwriting about how to use a gun. A search of her computer revealed that she had extensively researched different ways of killing someone, and the growing pile of evidence led to her arrest for Bill's murder several weeks after his death. In an unexpected twist, investigators discovered that Bill had been cheating on Anne with a woman named Barbara Miller. Anne had discovered the affair and Bill agreed to end it. He kept his word, but someone claiming to be Barbara soon started to harass the couple and their loved ones. It seemed like the so-called other woman didn't want to accept that the affair was over. Bill, his friends, and his family members had all received disturbing letters and emails, and at one point it seemed like the unwanted correspondence would never stop coming. A closer look at Anne's work computer revealed that she had been the one behind all the harassment, which she carried out from an email address she created impersonating Barbara, and her DNA was found on at least one of the physical letters that Barbara had supposedly sent to someone. The real Barbara had respected Bill's desire to end the affair, and Anne's claims of being stalked by her were a complete ruse. Furthermore, the timeline of events that Anne gave detectives didn't add up. She claimed that Bill had died sometime after she and their son had left the house for their shopping trip on the day they discovered his body. But the medical examiner who performed Bill's autopsy concluded that he had been murdered the night before, more than 16 hours earlier. Prosecutors charged Anne with Bill's murder and accused her of committing the crime as a way to end the marriage without losing out on her late husband's life insurance payout or the $500,000 worth of real estate that the couple owned together. Anne was found guilty of Bill's murder, despite her claims of innocence, and was sentenced to life in prison. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. David Kinney and Brad McGary. As an openly gay man from a conservative small town in Ohio, Brad McGary dealt with his fair share of prejudice throughout his life. But he had a close-knit group of friends and family members who accepted him for who he was, and he was well liked at his workplace after leaving his career as a hairdresser for a higher-paying position in the coal mining industry. Sadly, the 43-year-old's life was cut short in 2017 when his best friend David Kinney found him dead in his basement in a pool of blood. He had been shot in the head. David and his wife Sherry had stopped by Brad's home in the town of Bel Air to say hi and had grown concerned enough to enter when he failed to answer the door. Earlier that evening, Brad had excused himself from a family dinner, saying he had to meet someone at his house. After ruling out the likelihood of a hate crime, investigators became focused on trying to figure out who the mystery visitor was. The Kinneys suggested looking into Brad's recent ex-boyfriend, who was quickly ruled out as a suspect. A major break came when a close friend of Brad's told investigators that he was having a secret affair with a fellow miner named DJ, which happened to be David Kinney's nickname. Nobody else in Brad's life knew about or suspected the relationship between Brad and his married best friend, including Sherry Kinney. Correspondence on David's phone confirmed that his relationship with Brad was romantic, and he admitted to it during questioning. Investigators began to suspect that David killed Brad to prevent him from telling Sherry about their affair. David denied killing his friend, but law enforcement's theory was supported by surveillance footage, which showed David coming and going from Brad's house alone before he showed up with Sherry later that evening. He eventually admitted that Brad had pressured him to leave Sherry and claimed that his friend had threatened to tell his wife about their secret tryst. David confessed to killing Brad, but insisted that he had done so in self-defense after Brad pulled a gun on him during a physical struggle. An autopsy found that Kinney had shot Brad twice in the back of the head, making it highly unlikely that he acted in self-defense. Investigators ultimately concluded that David killed Brad because he was terrified of the damage Brad could do to his marriage and life. Sherry was ruled out as a suspect based on her shocked and devastated reaction to learning about the affair, which came across as extremely genuine. In early 2018, David was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 10. Justin Williams. Something went terribly wrong between 24-year-old Justin Williams and 22-year-old Deja Johnson, and it ended with Johnson being murdered, dismembered, and stuffed into 2 suitcases, which were kept in her Brooklyn apartment for over a month. Williams lived alongside his girlfriend's decomposing remains in her Cypress Hills apartment, using cleaning supplies and towels to stifle the smell as much as possible. According to detectives, he also left the windows open. Police discovered the carnage when they were called to conduct a welfare check at Johnson's home. Immediately upon entering, officers noticed pools of blood on the floor. It's safe to assume that the smell led them to the location of her body. Surveillance footage showed Johnson entering her apartment after a work shift one night in August of 2022, but she was never seen alive again. The evidence led investigators to one person, Williams. He allegedly waived his Miranda rights and admitted to the murder during questioning. Authorities charged him with murder and concealment of a human corpse. They're accusing him of stabbing the victim 9 times, 5 times to the front of the torso and 4 times to the back. Williams will face life in prison if convicted. Number 9. Ewan Jewett. 40-year-old Julie Minogue was brutally killed with an axe in Milford, Connecticut in 2022. Her teenage son witnessed the horrifying attack and dialed 911 to report it. The young man told police that he was woken up by the sound of his mother screaming. He also thought he overheard her yelling, "You didn't believe me." According to court documents obtained by Fox 61, he came downstairs to find his mom's boyfriend, Ewan Dewitt, standing over his mother's body. Dewitt was holding an axe and he was covered in blood. The teen ran back upstairs and called the police before jumping out his bedroom window to the ground below. Responding officers found Minogue's lifeless body on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, and there was a large axe on the stove nearby. In addition to her 17-year-old son, the victim's other child was also in the home at the time. Luckily, they were both physically unharmed and were placed in a family member's care. By then, Dewitt had fled the scene. Police tracked him through ring camera footage provided by a neighbor, and his mother also told officers that he called her and told her he had killed his girlfriend. Law enforcement caught up with Dewitt in West Haven and charged him with murder. According to an affidavit obtained by People magazine, Minogue feared Dewitt would kill her. She'd recently obtained a restraining order against him, writing in the application that she didn't feel she should be subjected to his abuse any longer. And it wasn't Dewitt's first encounter with the police either. In 2019, he was arrested for allegedly assaulting Minogue, at which time she was also given a restraining order. Sadly, regardless of the circumstances, her children are without a mother, and her family is left to pick up the pieces and move on. Number 8. Hunter Tatum. In October 2021, 26-year-old Summer Tatum discovered inappropriate text messages between her husband Hunter and another woman. On top of having cerebral palsy and being 6 months pregnant at the time, Summer now faced the additional stress of an argument with her husband that lasted for days in their Prattville, Alabama home. She was ultimately rushed to the hospital with gunshot wounds, but sadly she died from her injuries. Doctors tried to perform a premature delivery of her unborn son, Everett, but he also perished. During questioning, Hunter claimed that he and Summer wrestled over a gun and accidentally caused it to discharge during the struggle. But according to Assistant District Attorney Sarah Speaks, who accused Hunter of shooting his wife in the back of the head twice, the evidence told a much different story. Hunter was subsequently charged with 2 counts of murder. In an impassioned argument in court, Speaks said that Summer was on her knees in front of her husband, and her last words were, "Please don't kill me. Please don't shoot me." Before he stopped speaking with investigators and hired a lawyer, Hunter gave a statement to police that Speaks described as an admission to the cold-blooded murder of his pregnant, disabled wife. Hunter's attorney, Trey Norman, told the Montgomery Advisor that his client didn't admit to killing anyone in cold blood. He said that both Hunter and Summer each owned a gun and that they kept their guns beside their bed. Norman also claimed that the suspect spent days begging Summer to reconcile with him after she discovered that he was sexting with a woman in England. Prosecutors confirmed that Summer owned the .38 caliber revolver that fired the fatal bullet, but they are still confident that Hunter's responsible for her death. Hunter is scheduled to go to trial in June of 2023, which will hopefully bring the case to a long-awaited end for Summer's loved ones. If convicted, he'll face either the death penalty or life in prison. And by all appearances, the prosecution plans to pursue the death penalty full force. Number 7. Afab Pona. After meeting through a dating app in 2019, Afab Pona and Shraddha Walker moved in together in the Indian city of Delhi. Their relationship was tumultuous, and the pair argued frequently, especially as Shraddha pressured Afab to get married. But their loved ones never imagined that things would get as bad as they did in 2022 when Afab allegedly strangled Shraddha to death during one of their many arguments. He then dismembered her body into at least 35 pieces and bought a refrigerator specifically for storing her remains. Afab spent the next 16 days disposing of his lover's body parts by dumping them in various locations in a nearby forest in the middle of the night. A few months later, Shraddha's father filed a missing persons report with the police, saying that one of his daughter's friends had become concerned after they were unable to reach her and realized that her phone was turned off. Law enforcement began investigating the young woman's whereabouts, only to discover that Afab had cleaned the crime scene meticulously and had gone to great efforts to cover his tracks. Even the fridge he used to hold Shraddha's remains contained no trace of blood or other biological evidence. But Afab eventually admitted to killing Shraddha and said that he burned incense to mask the odor of her decomposing remains. He now faces a murder charge in connection with her death. Speaking with India Today, expert psychologist Dr. Sandeep Vora said that it wouldn't surprise him if there was more than one victim. In Vora's words, Afab is either a hardened criminal or a full-fledged psychopath who might have done similar acts in the past. He added that an act as horrific as what Afab did to Shraddha isn't something that a normal person is capable of. For now, investigators have found no evidence that Afab has victimized others. Hopefully, he'll never get the opportunity to do so. Number 6. Naim Vera. Anyone who's experienced a dysfunctional relationship knows what it's like when an argument drags on all night long and into the early morning hours, but you never expect these squabbles to end in death. That was unfortunately what happened in the case of 19-year-old Naim Vera, who made headlines in 2020 for allegedly killing his girlfriend, 24-year-old Brenda Michaela Gordillo, in Argentina. The pair were in the midst of an explosive disagreement about Brenda possibly being pregnant when they decided to go somewhere more private to hash things out. They went to a vacant apartment owned by Vera's family in Catamarca province, where Vera lost his temper and shoved Brenda, sending her tumbling down a flight of stairs. Unfortunately, this led to her death. The panicked killer wrapped the young woman's body in a blanket and attempted to burn her remains. He then put her body parts into garbage bags and left them in a nearby dumpster. Based on Vera's version of events, it sounded like he didn't mean to kill Brenda, but he clearly took a calculated and gruesome effort to conceal her remains rather than come forward and admit to the consequences of his actions. Investigators found a piece of his skin under Brenda's nail, indicating that she fought for her life in a struggle against him. This also suggested to authorities that there was more to their fight than him flying off the deep end and shoving her just one time. They concluded that someone asphyxiated Brenda by holding a piece of cloth over her face, proving that her killer experienced more than just a momentary lapse of judgment. Vera is currently serving a life sentence behind bars for killing his girlfriend. Number 5. Britany Wilson. On Christmas Eve 2021, police in Cape Girardeau, Missouri received a 911 call about suspicious activity. Officers responded to the residence and encountered 32-year-old Britany Wilson. She was standing in the front lawn wearing bloody clothing, and she had a sword in her hand. In the bedroom, they found 34-year-old Harrison Stephen Foster dead from multiple stab wounds. Wilson allegedly told the police that she and Foster had used methamphetamine earlier in the day. She also reportedly said that she believed multiple entities were inhabiting her boyfriend's body for several months leading up to the deadly incident. By stabbing him, she truly believed she was freeing him from possession. Wilson also claimed that Foster was harvesting body parts from humans. Her delusions resulted in her stabbing him 3 times before dialing 911. In the end, authorities charged her with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. She's currently being held in jail on a $2 million bond, but she has yet to be sentenced, and the case is ongoing. Number 4. Mipet Sin Palmer. What started out as a petty disagreement between a farm worker named Mipet Sin Palmer and his wife Daksha ended in death one day in 2022. Daksha kept calling Mipet Sin mad, and for some reason it pushed him over the edge. He brutally hacked his wife to death and fled the scene, but but law enforcement was quick to catch up with him in a neighboring village. Mipet allegedly admitted to the crime and described how outraged he was when Daksha kept taking verbal jabs at his mental state. When he could no longer take the alleged insults, he said he attacked her with a sharp-edged weapon. Locals rushed Daksha to the hospital, but sadly she died from her injuries. She suffered severe blood loss from a severed neck artery. Police said it was the second incident that year where a husband hacked his wife to death in the area. In early 2022, a man took an axe to his wife's head and neck during one of their many fights about money. Both men are facing murder charges and are at the mercy of India's notoriously slow criminal justice system, where cases are often known to drag on for years before a conclusion is reached. Number 3. Dianna Hembry. In Ohio in 2021, 40-year-old Dianna Hembry and her boyfriend, 51-year-old Michael Mudrick, got into an argument over pizza. It ended with Hembry shooting Mudrick in the neck, leaving him paralyzed. Mudrick managed to utter the words, "She shot me," to paramedics, while Hembry initially claimed that the gun fell out of its case and fired when it hit the floor. She changed her story, though, and said that she carried the gun into the bedroom and dropped it, and that it went off accidentally. Authorities charged Hembry with attempted murder and felonious assault. Prosecutors offered to drop the attempted murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the assault charge, and she agreed. In the meantime, Mudrick was put in a nursing home. Unfortunately, he died from his injuries in 2022, leaving behind 6 children and 16 grandkids. Hembry's now facing a mandatory 3-year sentence as part of her plea deal, but her case is ongoing. Number 2. Jason Chen. 22-year-old Jasmine "Jazzy" Pace's family became concerned when she didn't show up to her family's Thanksgiving dinner in 2022. They filed a missing persons report and shared information about her last known location at her boyfriend Jason Chen's apartment complex in Chattanooga. Jazzy's mom, Katrina Pace, somehow gained entry into the apartment and found her daughter's ID and several of her credit cards. Pace also noticed some cleaning supplies that appeared to be recently purchased. There have been no other signs of Jazzy since her disappearance, except for her abandoned vehicle, which was found on a roadside in the area. She planned to leave Chattanooga for a few days, according to the Dade County Sheriff's Office in Georgia, but based on the evidence, it seems as though she never reached her destination. At some point throughout the course of the investigation, Chen became the top suspect in her disappearance. Authorities eventually came to the conclusion that she was most likely killed, and they charged Chen with murder, saying that they found more evidence in his apartment pointing towards his possible guilt. For now, they're being tight-lipped regarding the details of what they believe happened to Jazzy. But to charge Chen for murder without a body most likely means they have a strong circumstantial case. Number 1. Nicole Dennison. In 2020, a 29-year-old flight attendant named Nicole Dennison walked into her Tampa area home to find her husband in bed with another woman. She was understandably enraged and allegedly punched her unfaithful partner, leaving him with a black eye. But she didn't stop there. After giving her husband a shiner, Dennison reportedly flew into a blind rage and smashed his guitar, leaving a large hole in the wall. According to an arrest affidavit, responding officers noticed that Dennison displayed signs indicating that she might be under the influence of alcohol. Dennison was charged with misdemeanor domestic battery and was released on her own recognizance. She was also allowed to continue having contact with the victim while the case worked its way through the court system. Thanks for watching. If you could undo your most toxic relationship and all of the effects it had on your life, would you take advantage of the opportunity? Or was the experience somehow worth it despite being painful and unhealthy? Share your thoughts in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.